Thank you for joining us. I'm Ann Trujillo.
And I'm Shannon Ogden. And our top story at 10 is fires.
Right now, there are currently 8 major wildfires burning in Colorado. More than 197,000 acres have been affected by those fires.
And as far as we know, it is at 0% containment.
Fire crews are battling the 416 fire in Durango, the Spring Fire in Costilla County, the Golf Course Fire in Grand Lake, and now the Badger Creek Fire near the Wyoming border.
That fire, though now the 3rd largest in state history, has destroyed more than 130 homes.
It's not the only fire burning in Colorado right now.
Even with our round of rain, as we come on the air tonight, more than 10 fires are still burning through thousands of acres of Colorado land.
The Spring Fire alone has burned an area larger than the city of Denver. In fact, it is larger than the city of Atlanta and Manhattan combined.
And the extent
Over the past couple of decades in Colorado, wildfires have spread further, burned hotter, and recovered more slowly than historic patterns. What is causing this? If the trend continues, what is the outcome? Buffalo Creek, a humble community of less than 300 permanent residents. It is surrounded by dense forests and impressive rock formations. In 1996, an unattended campfire spread out of control and burned down more than 11,000 acres of Pike National Forest. "22 years later, the scene hasn't changed much. There has been almost no new pine growth, and to the untrained eye, it looks quite barren. Why hadn't the forest recovered after 20 plus years? To understand what's happening here and the western United States, I needed to learn more about wildfires, how often they happen, and how severely they burn. When it comes to the severity of wildfires, it refers to the degree to which a site has been altered or changed by the fire. This is broken down into 3 distinct categories: ground fires, surface fires, and crown fires. In ground fires, typically humus, peat, and other similar dead vegetation burns off. These are slow-moving fires that are difficult to put out. Surface fires burn only surface litter. These are the easiest fires to put out and cause the least amount of damage to a forest. Crown fires burn trees up their entire length, all the way to the top, to the crowns of the trees. These are the most intense fires. I would later learn that 80% of the Buffalo Creek wildfire was a crown fire, meaning that it burnt away 80% of the mature trees. Equally as important to the severity of fires is the frequency. As the frequency changes, so does the amount of available fuel. As the amount of fuel changes, so does the intensity of the fire. It's easy to see how all of these interact with each other, and changing one changes everything. For example, as the human population increased in Colorado, so too did the amount of people living in close proximity to the forests. Their homes, their personal property, needed to be protected from these fires. This led to fire suppression. Fire suppression, used to protect personal property over a long enough period of time, increased the total amount of available fuel. This increase in fuel and decrease in fire frequency made Colorado's forests much more dense than they had been historically.
Travel back to the early 1800s in Colorado, and the images show lower elevation forests with stands of trees among big open meadows.
The first thing I see is that we're missing the meadows. Where are the meadows?
Cheng says meadows are important. Wildfire is less intense if it spreads through grass, and that gives trees a better chance of survival. The goal is to learn from history, thinning forests to prepare them for wildfires.
Now, we're not trying to exclude fire, we're actually trying to set the landscape up to receive fire.
A few miles away, seasonal workers are doing just that. In a separate plot on Hall Ranch, they cut down trees. More than 1,000 tree logs are stacked chest high in a large open meadow. The end result might be what you would have seen here 100 years ago.
In addition to the thousands of acres burned that day, 10 homes were destroyed. Unfortunately for the residents of Buffalo Creek, this was not the end of the destruction.
After the fire came a flood. A summer downpour washed over the burned-out forest. That started a process of erosion that's continued ever since, slowly filling the reservoir with sediment. Now Colorado's biggest water provider wants to undo the damage. Denver water engineer Doug Raitt told me that, like the problem, the solution has been building for a long time.
Well, immediately following the flash floods, Denver Water spent about $1 million pulling out logs and propane tanks and tires and refrigerators from the reservoir and had to stop treatment operations for quite a while. And since then, there's been studies underway, almost 14 years now of studies to determine the optimum way to recover from the sediment that flowed in the reservoir and get back to the position we had many years ago for water going through the treatment system to the Denver Water customers.
This project is going to cost $30 million. Will Denver Water ratepayers see some effect of that in their water bills?
Unfortunately, they already have. Part of last year's rate adjustment was to allow Denver Water to proceed with this project. So it's unfortunate that the rate increase was necessary, but this is one of the major projects that is coming out of that adjustment.
In one day, the flood deposited 15 years' worth of sediment into Strontia Spring Reservoir, washed away the fire station, destroyed Buffalo Creek's water system, and took the lives of 2 residents. After the fire and flood, Forest Roads 538, 543, and 695 were closed to public use. In addition, Buffalo Picnic Area, Baldy, Tramway, and the Top of the World campgrounds were destroyed, removed, and closed permanently. After all of this death and destruction, what is to become of the Buffalo Creek burn area?
I'm Tom Veblen. I'm a professor in the geography department, and I study in forest ecology, mainly in Colorado, but also in southern South America.
Thank you for joining us today. You and your research team have recently completed a study on the impacts that severe wildfires and climate change are having on tree regeneration in areas that burned along the Colorado Front Range. Please give us a background on the study.
There is substantially less tree regeneration than what you would expect if the forest was going to recover back to the same tree density and the same forest composition. And there are basically 2 explanations for why the recovery is much less than expected. That is, 1, we've had very high severity fires, so that means there is a lack of seed sources over large areas. And even in places where you do have some surviving trees, we're seeing a lack of establishment of seedlings, a lack of survival of seedlings at the driest sites, which indicates that under the warmer temperatures and drier conditions today, we're seeing a severe impediment to tree regeneration.
So we can pretty much expect mostly grasslands now in areas that used to have trees?
Well, not necessarily mostly. Again, it depends on where you are in the burn. So at the higher elevations and on moisture aspects, like north-facing slopes, often the regeneration is fine. It's on the drier sites at low elevation and south-facing slopes where we see the somewhat surprising lack of tree regeneration. And so that's an indication that we're probably seeing the beginning of a process associated with climate change, with warming temperatures, that initiates initially at the driest sites. Over time, with continued warming, it's likely that we're going to see that retreat of the forest edge after fire moving upslope.
Just because there has been little pine growth does not mean that the burn area hasn't recovered at all. Along the washed out stream beds, the riparian area has shown a notable recovery in aspen growth and shrubs. Everywhere else in the burn area, grasses, flowers, shrubs, and other low-lying flora has grown unrestricted by the tree's canopy of shade. Due to the destruction of the campgrounds and the closure of the roads, the wildlife has returned. Even the section of the Colorado Trail that comes through here has seen plenty of hikers and cyclists return. As the stewards of Earth, it seems that we've started a chain of events that can't easily be stopped. Even so, nature is more beautiful and resilient than you and I could ever be or will ever know. Regardless of the damage that has been done and the damage that will be done, nature is worth protecting. When we as a collective recognize nature's true value and treat it with the respect that it deserves, it will be there for us, as it always has been. I just hope, for our own sake, that we recognize this sooner than later.
With a ranger's hat and shovel and a pair of dungarees, you will find him in the forest, always sniffing at the breeze. People stop and pay attention when he tells them to beware, 'cause everybody knows that he's the fire-preventing bear. Smokey the Bear, Smokey the Bear, prowling and a-growling and a-sniffing the air. He can find a fire before it starts to flame, that's why they call him Smokey, that was how he got his name. You can take a tip from Smokey that there's nothing like a tree, 'cause they're good for kids to climb in and they're beautiful to see. You just have to look around you and you'll find it's not a joke to see what you'd be missing if they all went up in smoke. Smokey the Bear, Smokey the Bear, prowling and a-growling and a-sniffing the air. He can find a fire before it starts to flame, that's why they called him Smokey, that was how he got his name. You can camp upon his doorstep and he'll make you feel at home. You can run and hunt and ramble anywhere you care to roam. He will let you take his honey and pretend he's not so smart, but don't you harm the trees, for he's a ranger in his heart.